Hello and welcome to Maximum B.I.G, the first talking book about the artist. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson and it's read by Sian Jones. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
I would never wish death on nobody, you know what I'm saying, because ain't no coming back from that.
The 9th of March 1997 was less than an hour old when gunshots echoed through the Los Angeles night. A common enough occurrence in a city dominated by armed and feuding gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, constantly competing with each other for territory, respect, money and reputation. But this was an attack that was to have far wider implications than any ordinary drive-by shooting. For the victim in this case was Christopher George Latour Wallace, aka rapper Biggie Smalls, aka Big Poppa, aka the Notorious B.I.G, one of the most successful hip-hop artists that ever lived. Biggie had been at a lavish and star-studded music industry party hosted by Vibe magazine, held at the Peterson Automotive Museum on LA's Miracle Mile, one of the busiest business districts in the world. It was the after-party for the 11th annual Soul Train Music Awards, which had been held the night before and at which Biggie had been a guest presenter. He'd walked on to present the Best Female R&B or Soul Album Award to Toni Braxton and had been met with a deafening chorus of boos and jeers that failed to subside. For despite being one of America's most popular and respected rappers, Biggie was on enemy turf in LA. A native New Yorker, he'd become inadvertently involved in a media-hyped feud between East and West Coast hip-hop artists, a feud that had spilled over into the underworld of street gangs, and which had turned deadly with the murder of Californian rapper Tupac Shakur only 6 months before. From his position on the podium, Biggie could clearly see audience members flashing West Side hand signals, making sure he knew just which gang's turf he was on. The after-party had been broken up by Los Angeles fire marshals at 12:35 a.m. due to overcrowding. Despite remaining seated due to a leg injury sustained in a car crash 6 months earlier, Biggie was, by all accounts, having a good time. He left quietly with the same entourage he had arrived with: Sean Puffy Combs, his record label manager, fellow rapper and sidekick Lil Cease, and friend and road manager Damian Butler, along with their bodyguards who were all off-duty policemen. They were on their way to another party at the house of Interscope Records executive Stephen Stout. They took 2 cars. Puffy and his crew travelled in one, while Biggie, Damian and Lil Cease travelled in another. Damian and Lil Cease sat in the back while Biggie sat up front next to the driver, a bodyguard identified only as Greg. The other bodyguards travelled in a 3rd car, and in that order they formed a motorcade heading across town. All 3 vehicles stopped at a red light on the intersection of Fairfax Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard, just in front of the museum and surrounded by crowds of departing partygoers, fans and hangers-on. As they waited for the lights to change, a dark sedan pulled up alongside Biggie's vehicle. The driver fired an automatic 9mm pistol directly at the passenger window where Biggie was sitting. Between 6 and 10 shots were fired in quick succession and at close range before the sedan sped away. The car and its driver were never seen again. Biggie, who had attempted to duck down and avoid the hail of bullets, was slumped unconscious in his seat, the only one hit. Screams were heard. The police were called. Puffy Combs leapt from his car and pulled open Biggie's door and tried to haul his friend from the vehicle, but he was too large and heavy. On his knees beside the car, he tried again, to no avail. Finally, he propped him back in his seat, closed the door and ordered Greg, the driver, to take Biggie immediately to the nearby Cedars Sinai Medical Centre, rather than wait for the police or an ambulance. Puffy followed close behind as the car sped off, and a few minutes later both were at the hospital, where Biggie was wheeled into an emergency room. He had been shot 7 times in the chest and abdomen, had lost massive amounts of blood and was still bleeding internally. He had stopped breathing. Paramedics tried to revive him, but at 1:15 a.m, Biggie was pronounced dead on arrival. He was 24 years old. Biggie's second album, Life After Death, was released on March 25, 1997. The title was by then hideously appropriate, for Biggie Smalls had been dead for just over 2 weeks, and the whole hip-hop community was still in mourning and in shock. 6 months earlier, when Tupac Shakur had been killed in tragically similar circumstances, there were many who accused Big of being somehow involved, particularly as Tupac had survived a previous shooting, which he accused his former friend turned rival Biggie of setting up. Representing the East and West Coast respectively, Biggie and Tupac were the most successful and respected rappers of any era. They were winning awards and releasing multi-platinum selling albums, the content of which was sexually explicit, aggressive and grimly violent, reflecting the perceived reality of life on the ghetto streets that both had, through their success, long since left behind. Both projected larger-than-life macho gangster personas. Tupac the thug poet, B.I.G. a 1930s mafia don. Both also had outspoken and controversial record company bosses. In Biggie's case, Puffy Combs, head of Bad Boy Entertainments, who would later become a hugely successful artist in his own right as Puff Daddy, and in Tupac's case, Marion Suge Knight, head of Death Row Records, who at the time of Biggie's murder was beginning a 9-year jail sentence arising from a complicated run of assault, intimidation and financial irregularities. These two men would make sure that their artists' lucrative careers would continue to grow long after both had died violently within 6 months of each other. The fact that both murders remain unsolved only adds to the mythology that has grown around the two men. Biggie's notoriety has increased since his death, to the point where it threatens to obscure the truth of his life and the fact that he was a victim of his own success as much as anything else. As big as he was nowhere near as big as the legend that he created, a legend that eventually destroyed him.
Check it out, it's the Notorious B.I.G. Chillin', you know what I mean?
Biggie Smalls was born Christopher George Latour Wallace on the 21st of May 1972. His father, from whom he inherited his 2 middle names, was a businessman and politician from Jamaica. Biggie never knew him. He left his wife and son behind in their New York apartment when the latter was not yet 2 years old. Valletta Wallace was also Jamaican, although she didn't meet her husband until 1961, 2 years after she had emigrated to the United States. She fell in love both with America and with this sweet-talking man from her homeland. But while she made the US her permanent home, becoming a naturalized citizen, she divorced George Latour after he walked out and had nothing else to do with him. Valletta never remarried and raised Christopher as a single parent. It wasn't easy. They lived at 226 St. James Place, just off Fulton Street in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, in a townhouse apartment. When Christopher was born, Clinton Hill was a black, working-class inner-city neighbourhood. Not exactly paradise, but hardly a rough, crime-ridden ghetto either. For the real thug life, you had to head 10 minutes north to Bedford-Stuyvesant. It was the area that the teenage Biggie would naturally gravitate towards. Biggie grew up with tree-lined concrete sidewalks, vacant lots and derelict buildings in the process of being torn down, the smell of the Chinese takeaways and the sound of children playing in the street, and music. Music was everywhere. Funk, soul, disco and eventually R&B and hip-hop. There was reggae too, which would prove to be an often overlooked influence on Biggie's own work. Every year until he was 15, he would vacation with his mother's family in Jamaica, an idyllic tropical paradise which would later come to represent to him a symbol of childhood innocence lost. His grandfather in particular provided the male role model that Biggie never had in his own dad, and he idolised him. As a child, he loved A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh books, written for and featuring Milne's own son, Christopher Robin. Biggie bore little resemblance to his namesake, however, and was more like the story's main protagonist, the rotund, honey-loving bear who liked nothing better than to hang out all day with his friends in the Thousand Acre Hood, chilling out and making up rhymes in his head. Christopher Wallace's childhood nickname was Chrissy Poo, after the bear, but that soon changed to a simpler, more descriptive phrase: Big. From the day he started school, Christopher towered over his classmates, often intimidating them. He wasn't fat exactly, just big-boned, broad-shouldered, large in every sense. The neighbourhood kids respected his bulk, and he won a reputation as a handy kid to have in your gang. Biggie was rarely called upon to prove his toughness, however, and his presence alone, coupled with the mean, hard stare that would later become his trademark, meant that few dared to mess with him. The baby-faced giant, who never needed to shave in his entire short life, was also a keen and talented basketball player. Smaller kids would move out of the way as they saw him coming down the court, ready to execute his practice set move that would send the ball spinning through the net. His mother also made sure he did well at school and instilled a strong work ethic that led to a part-time job bagging up groceries at a local store. All this changed, however, when Biggie hit his teens. Raging hormones, peer pressure, and a growing self-consciousness combined, as they inevitably do, to turn a shy, studious kid into a teenage rebel. He started hanging out in Bedford-Stuyvesant, drinking malt liquor and smoking weed like everybody else. Soon he was selling $5 and $10 bags of marijuana on street corners, and the grocery job was out of the window. But he was never the big-time drug dealer he later made out. Local businessmen and cops alike remember him as a sweet kid who mixed with the wrong crowd. A kid that did a bit of hustling, but was basically all right. Biggie was arrested many times as a teenager, but never charged. Generally, he was just brought in when police were looking for witnesses to a crime and were told to go out and haul in the usual subjects. Inevitably, Biggie would break down in tears, protesting his innocence of whatever it was they thought he'd done. Then they'd call his mother to come and collect him. Biggie chose to hang out on the wrong side of the tracks, but he was still just a regular kid. He always came out top of his class at school, showing a particular talent for drawing, until he quit suddenly at 17. Both his mother and his teachers despaired. Here he was, a bright student, throwing away his one chance of making something of his life in order to hang out with whores, pimps and hustlers. But Biggie's plans for his future were strictly non-academic. He saw the short-term financial rewards and glamour that came with dealing drugs, but he wasn't going to do that for the rest of his life either. He saw a way out, not through school, but through the street life that fascinated him, the music and rhymes that fired him, and the words and stories that were constantly going round in his head. "I'm going to be a famous rapper," he'd say. "I'm going to be big." And he was.
Got love for them niggas, period. Just from being in the game. I mean, I grew up to that shit. When my mom got me a radio for Christmas, she got me a Fat Boys tape and a Run DMC tape. That's all I had.
When Biggie hit his teens in the mid-1980s, hip-hop was just beginning to really take off. Although it had originated in New York in the late 70s with pioneering artists like Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, and Afrika Bambaataa, throughout the 80s it emerged as a global phenomenon that was unquestionably the music of a generation. And when artists like the Beastie Boys, Run DMC and Public Enemy began having crossover hits that appealed as much to white college kids as disaffected black youth, everyone started to realise that rap could mean big money, long-term careers and universal acclaim. In Brooklyn, every kid on the streets was a rapper. They didn't think of becoming stars, it was just what you did. It was the culture that hip-hop had emerged from in the first place. All the elements, rhyming and rapping, DJ scratching, graffiti and breakdancing were always there, part of the neighbourhood while Biggie was growing up. Rap was in his blood. But Christopher Wallace always had the ability to think bigger than his peers. He loved this music and he wanted to do something with it. His talent was not so much as a technically brilliant rapper. He wasn't the fastest kid on the block, but as a writer with an astonishing command of imagination and memory. From when he first started rapping, Biggie never wrote down any of his lyrics. He never needed to. His performances were constantly rehearsed. He lived with them every day. Like the Celtic druids and bards who were forbidden to write down their lore, memorising hundreds of epic poems by heart, Biggie created and stored whole songs fully formed in his head, working in a purely oral tradition. After rapping with a local soul and R&B vocal outfit called the Old Gold Brothers, he teamed up with a local kid who fancied himself as a DJ, one Chico Del Vico. Chico had a couple of turntables in his room, and he'd mix and scratch while Biggie freestyled playful party raps about girls, money, good times, success, and most of all, himself. The basis of rap is an exaggerated boasting, bragging about yourself, your prowess, and your exploits. Biggie, then calling himself Quest, rapped about how he was going to make it big, get away from the streets, and live the high life. But from these simple, almost naive beginnings, more complex songs developed. He worked on narrative structure, on making his rhymes less obvious, on presentation, and on forging a unique style for himself. He expanded on the stories he heard on the street, the exploits of the real hardened criminals he knew more by reputation than anything else, and created visions worthy of acclaimed urban writers like James Elroy or Hubert Selby Jr. By the late 80s, both the party tunes of Run DMC and the political consciousness of Public Enemy were losing ground to the explosive phenomenon known as gangster rap. This was when Californian hip-hop, so often the poor relation to the New York scene, really came into its own. NWA, featuring Ice Cube and Dr. Dre, came straight out of Compton and into the charts and the headlines, generating controversy and record sales in equal amounts. Hot on their heels was Ice-T, another LA native who spun stark, sparse and brutal narratives about gang life and everyday violence in the hood. Soon, each new rap record seemed to be trying to outdo the last in terms of the number of expletives and references to murder, guns, beatings, rapes and revenge. Critics said that the artists concerned were creating nothing but oral pornography. The rappers responded by saying they were just telling it like it was. And the more they upped the ante, the more they sold. Biggie was listening carefully. He was a fan after all. If that was the way hip-hop was going, then he could do better than all of them. If audiences wanted the real street life, he'd be the one to give it to them. In 1991, he and Chico recorded some of their jams onto a tape in Chico's bedroom and began hustling copies around the neighbourhood. He convinced his local record store, Culture Lion, to stock them, and a fellow MC, 50 Grand, managed to get a tape to veteran DJ Mr. C, who dug it so much that he sought Biggie out. The two became friends, and it was C who persuaded Biggie to send a tape to hip-hop magazine The Source, which ran an unsigned hype column. He was reluctant at first as he didn't think the tape was good enough. At C's insistence, however, he re-recorded a new, cleaner version of the tape, which C gave to Source columnist Matt Life. Matt Life's review appeared in the March 1992 issue of the magazine. Though short, it was overwhelmingly positive, and even included a photo of the artist, who was still known as Quest. But as well as Matt, Mr. C also passed the tape to a young A&R man known as Sean Puffy Coombs. Coombs was less than 2 years older than Biggie and was brought up in Harlem, the son of a drug dealer who was killed when Sean was just 3 years old. His mother, however, never told Sean or his baby sister the truth about who their father was, and did her best to distance them from their ghetto background. When Sean was 11, she enrolled him at Mount St. Michael's Academy, an all-male private prep school, from which he went on to Howard University to major in business administration. After 2 years at university, Sean dropped out. He was already working as an unpaid intern at Uptown Records, a New York-based R&B label. In 1991, he was promoted to director of A&R, and by the end of 1992, he was A&R Vice President at just 22, the youngest in music business history. But Puffy, a high school football nickname based on his habit of puffing out his shirt to make himself look bigger, was only just beginning. He was planning to set up his own subsidiary label and production company within Uptown, and was scouting around for artists with which to launch it. That was when he found Big. Puffy claimed that as soon as he heard Biggie's tape, It just bugged me out. His voice just hypnotised me. Yet no one seemed to have a contact number for the rapper. Puffy drove down to Brooklyn and began asking around, hanging out on Fulton Street, trying to locate him. Eventually they met up in a diner, and Puffy wasted no time in offering Big a record deal. He accepted. The first thing he did on signing to Uptown was to change his stage name. He adopted the alias Biggie Smalls after a character in the 70s blaxploitation film Uptown Saturday Night. Puffy, meanwhile, worked on Big's image. Figuring that he looked like, in his words, a liquor store robber, Puffy decided to capitalise on this and romanticise it. Big was dressed up Al Capone style, his huge frame flattered by stylish 1930s mobster suits, a wide-brimmed felt hat pulled down over his lazy eye, an enormous cigar clamped between his teeth. It was a striking and original look. Puffy first used Big on the 1993 album What's the 411 by Mary J. Blige, which he was producing at the time of their meeting. Big made a guest appearance on the track Real Love. He followed that with a cameo on a song called Dolly My Baby by ragga star Supercat, and cut his first solo single with Party and Bullshit from the film Who's the Man. The song was a hit and an instant classic, and Biggie scored another coup when he was invited to appear on Michael Jackson's History album, as well as the debut LP by one R. Kelly. Biggie Smalls had gone from a high school dropout hustling on street corners to the upper echelons of the music business almost literally overnight. In a single flash, a new star had appeared in the firmament.
Cause I know how niggas is. When you in the streets and you hustling, you know how niggas is, cause you was one of them niggas, you know what I'm saying?
Ready to Die, Biggie's 1994 debut album, opens with the sound of a woman giving birth. Curtis Mayfield's Superfly playing in the background sets the time period as being the early 70s, around the same point that Biggie himself was born. The scene then changes abruptly as the Sugar Hill Gang's 1979 hit Rapper's Delight plays behind a violent argument between the once joyous parents, with the husband walking out and leaving, just as Biggie's own father had done. Then it's the 80s and the kid is grown up, being egged on by a friend to take part in a heist job. There are gunshots and screams. The next thing we hear, the music is bang up to date, and Biggie, for it is he, or at least the persona he assumes on record, is leaving jail, swearing that he won't be back. Which sets us up perfectly for the first track proper, Things Done Changed. Over sweeping cinematic strings and beats, Biggie contrasts then and now in terms of escalating violence, cynicism, crime and poverty, even making reference to his mother's 1993 breast cancer and mastectomy at the song's climax. An affecting and unusual piece of personal honesty. Gimme the Loot is an instructional tract on robbery with violence, explained with typical bravado. The track ends with more bursts of gunfire which fade into graphic, gagging sounds. That's the Chronic, a voice mutters, and we're into machine gun funk, riding on a catchy, relentless jazzy sample from Chief Rocker by Lords of the Underground. Warning uses a sample of Isaac Hayes' version of Walk On By and tells of a phone call from Pop at the barber shop, saying that some guys who used to know Biggie back in the day are out to kill him and steal his money now that he's rich and famous. Needless to say, he's not scared, and the track ends with the two would-be housebreakers being blown away by Biggie's long-range rifle. The title track continues the theme. Biggie's not scared of anyone. He's the baddest mother on the block, and if the worst comes to worst, he's ready to die. When it comes to sex, I'm similar to the gorilla in Manila, Biggie informs us on the hit single One More Chance. For those in doubt as to what that means, he goes on to elaborate in graphic detail. They don't call me big for nothing. The chorus consists of the ladies moaning, "Oh Biggie, give me one more chance." Treat them mean, keep them keen seems to be the message. We then have a short interlude in which we eavesdrop on the action in Biggie's bedroom. He appears to be doing the mattress squeaking nasty with a rich white girl who gets off on calling him every racist stereotype name under the sun as he humps her to orgasm. He wasn't the first to tell it, but it's quite a sophisticated joke, though got over in the crudest style. The What, a duet with Method Man, is something of a wasted opportunity, descending into predictable macho boasting. Better is Juicy, riding a classic 80s electro-funk groove and featuring guest vocals from Total on a chorus that could almost pass for early Madonna. Stereotypes of the black male misunderstood, and it's still all good, Biggie raps, summing up the paradox of the hip-hop game while making no apologies for his success. If glorifying the violence and misogyny of the streets sells and gets him off of those streets and into a champagne lifestyle, then so be it. Who wouldn't grab the chance if they had the talent? The title of Me and My Bitch disguises what is as close to a straightforward tender love song as Big would ever write. It's also a Bonnie and Clyde style narrative about a man and a wife who are equal partners in crime, planning and carrying out robberies together. Until she's shot dead by police and he has no choice but to drive away and save his own skin, knowing he's lost the best friend he'll ever have. Big Popper was another hit single, reminiscing about Big's Brooklyn upbringing and creating another alias by which he would be known in the future. Respect is a further autobiographical exploration of his own up and down relations with money, crime, street life, jail and his mother, featuring ragga vocalist Diana King over a tight George McRae loop. Among other things, this tells the story of Biggie's arrest, aged 17, in South Carolina for selling crack, and how his mother used the compensation money Biggie had received for a broken foot after falling out of a bus to bail him out. Ready to Die was released under the name The Notorious B.I.G, following Big and Puffy's discovery that there was a little-known California rapper also working under the name of Biggie Smalls. Ironically, the other Biggie Smalls would also die young and would be remembered by Tupac Shakur on his track Bless the Dead, further confusing the complex relationship between the two men. For legal reasons, Biggie would release all his recordings under the name The Notorious B.I.G, although he would also continue to be known as Biggie Smalls for the rest of his life. In 1995, Biggie won Best Rap Artist and Best Rap Single for One More Chance, which had entered the Billboard charts at number 5, one of the highest debuting singles ever. Along with Big Popper, it reached number 1 and went double platinum, while a further 4 tracks were released from the LP to become hit singles. Part of Biggie's appeal was that he was one of the few artists who appealed to both East and West Coast music fans. Biggie listened to and loved California rap, especially the gangster and G-funk sounds created by Dr. Dre. Dre's 1992 album, The Chronic, had revolutionised hip-hop, and its lush yet menacing, complex and cinematic feel was both a challenge and an inspiration to Big and Puffy. Ready to Die was their response, combining the best of both New York and California hip-hop into a whole that represented another step forward for the genre. Biggie had the perfect voice for his material. Cold, calm and threatening, but able too to reflect the humour in his rhymes. Ready to Die, released on Puffy's Bad Boy Entertainment's label, which had done a deal with Arista BMG following Puffy's sacking from Uptown for insubordination, made Biggie a superstar. He had everything he ever wanted, but his troubles were only just beginning.
I was more in the mind frame of keep your mouth shut, Big. You know what I'm saying? Just don't feed into it. If you feed into it, it's gonna do nothing but escalate. You know what I'm saying? I knew it wasn't true. Or at least what I knew I was getting blamed for wasn't true. I can't speak for nothing else. You know, I wasn't there. But I know what he was blaming me for wasn't true. So it don't make no sense me sitting there trying to make records or hit magazines and TVs screaming how it ain't true. You know what I'm saying? If it ain't true, I just gotta egg it.
When Ready to Die was first released, Biggie and Tupac were still friends, and Tupac was by far the more successful and established artist of the two. His albums had gone gold and platinum, and his image, a mixture of street poet and gangster thug, along with his brilliant prophetic lyrics and rhyming style, had made him a hero to a generation of black youth. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had been a founder member of the Black Panthers, the radical New York-based black liberation group that had emerged from the race riots, assassinations, and revolutionary movements of the late 60s. He was raised in a San Francisco housing project and grew into an intensely charismatic and attractive young man, a brilliant poet with a strong political grounding, an explosive temper, and a penchant for trouble. He was arrested 8 times between 1991 and 1996, at the same time as he was carving out his career as one of the most successful rap performers ever. Tupac was also a talented actor, a natural who appeared in hit films such as Poetic Justice, Above the Rim, and Gridlocked. Many, including Biggie, felt that he was an actor first and foremost, who played up to his role and began to believe in the character he had created. He and Biggie first met when the latter was just starting out as a rapper, and during a show at the New York Ritz, Tupac invited Biggie to perform on stage with him. When Tupac returned to New York for a longer stay, filming Above the Rim, he and Biggie began regularly hanging out and going to clubs together. Biggie regularly opened for Tupac at sellout shows on the East Coast, providing him with invaluable exposure and helping to kickstart his career. They were close friends and even recorded together. But all that would change at the end of 1994. Tupac was on trial in New York for a sexual assault case dating back to the previous year. Whilst there, he was asked to record with a New York rapper called Little Sean for a fee of $7,000. A session was arranged at Quad Studios off Times Square in the early hours of November the 13th. Tupac arrived at 12:15 in the morning with his 3-man entourage. Upstairs, in another part of the studio, Biggie, Puffy, and the group Junior Mafia were also recording, working on the video for the single Warning. But there was no warning as to what was to happen next. Just inside the lobby of the studio, Tupac and his crew were ambushed by 3 men. 2 were already inside. A third had followed them as they were buzzed in. They pointed guns at Tupac and friends and proceeded to strip them of the thousands of dollars worth of jewellery they were wearing. Tupac went for one of the gunmen who opened fire. He was shot twice in the head, twice in the groin, and once in the hand, while his manager, Freddie Moore, was shot once in the abdomen. Amazingly, both men not only survived, they were still standing. After the robbers made their getaway, Tupac took the elevator up to the 8th floor. Although the NYPD had already arrived and were insisting that the ambush had to be a setup, Tupac paced up and down, demanding that the police be called, until someone rolled a joint to calm him down. According to onlookers, he was in full James Cagney mode. Tupac was driven to Bellevue Hospital, where he underwent surgery and appeared in court for his sexual assault trial in bandages and a wheelchair. A few days later, he was sentenced to 4.5 years imprisonment. While inside, Tupac brooded on the ambush and grew more and more convinced that not only had someone set him up, but that everyone present knew who did it and were covering for them. Eventually, he focused the blame on 3 people: the Notorious B.I.G, Puffy Combs, and his own cousin, who had arrived with him, Randy Stretch Walker. It didn't help that while Tupac languished in jail, Biggie's career exploded, with Ready to Die becoming one of the biggest rap albums ever, nor that Biggie never visited him in prison. Tupac's lawyers appealed against his sentence, and 8 months in, a judge ruled that he should be allowed to go free while awaiting the appeal's outcome. Bail, however, was set at $1.4 million, a sum neither Tupac nor his family could afford. It was at this point that Marion Suge Knight entered the picture. Along with Dr. Dre, Knight had set up Death Row Records, so named because so many of its employees and acts had criminal convictions. It was the home of gangster rap, and Knight made no secret of his ongoing affiliation with the ruling gang of his home turf in Compton, LA, the Bloods. He wore their colours, even decorating Death Row's offices in them. From the start, the label had gained a reputation for acquiring funds and artists through dubious means, and Knight was literally one of the most feared men in the music business. He had repeatedly visited Tupac in prison, trying to get him to sign with Death Row. Now he promised to stump up the bail money if Tupac signed on the dotted line. He agreed, and by the time Tupac was released 11 months into his sentence, his album All Eyes on Me was at number 1, raking in the profits for Death Row Records. Night undoubtedly encouraged and fueled Tupac's bitterness and paranoia towards Puff and Biggie. One of his first appearances on being freed was in an interview for MTV, where he said he was mad because his little brother had got so big and rich that he didn't have respect for him anymore. And he promised that he was going to come after him, claiming he had every right to be mad when half of the major New York rappers or their agents or their somebody was there when I got shot and nobody could give me no information. Biggie's response to the accusations was one of shock and dismay. He refused to be drawn in but demanded an apology and that the accusations be withdrawn before someone came after him with a gun. Biggie claimed he didn't even know Tupac was at the studio until he saw him being wheeled away on a stretcher. But Biggie would later align himself with the widely held theory that 3 of Tupac's wounds were self-inflicted. Although police claim that Tupac was unarmed, witnesses say that he went for a gun in his belt. One of his assailants tried to stop him and the gun went off, and that Tupac was too embarrassed and angry about this to come clean. It was like an ongoing role, a character he couldn't get out of, Big later told Vibe magazine. But it was a deadly script that neither one of them would exit alive.
Puffy, man, Puff is real tight. That's my boy. He look out for me, you know what I'm saying? Took me out the streets, gave a nigga a chance.
While Tupac was in jail, however, Biggie had his own legal problems to deal with. In January 1995, he was accused of taking part in an assault on music promoter Nathaniel Banks after the cancellation of one of his concerts in Camden, New Jersey. After Biggie failed to show up in court, a warrant was issued for his arrest, and he was charged with assault and robbery and jailed for 4 days. He was eventually acquitted after a court ascertained that he hadn't even been present at the time of the attack, but the case wasn't settled until 2 years later, by which time Biggie had already been ordered to pay Banks $43,000 in damages and medical bills. In March 1995, Biggie and a friend were harassed by autograph hunters after leaving a Manhattan nightclub. After a verbal argument, the fans left in a cab, which Biggie and his friend pursued, caught up with and attacked with baseball bats. Big was sentenced to 100 hours community service. On a more positive note, he used his success to help out other kids from his neighbourhood, forming the group Junior Mafia, who backed him up on Ready to Die and who released their own hit album Conspiracy in 1995. They were a bunch of 9 young kids from off the streets, including Lil Cease and Lil Kim, who would go on to solo success in her own right. Biggie promised that if he made it first, he'd bring them up with him, and he was true to his word. Notorious B.I.G. and Junior Mafia were all part of the Bad Boy family, as Puffy referred to his artists, as was an R&B singer named Faith Evans. She and Biggie met at the end of August 1995, and 8 days later, they were married. It was love at first sight, but the couple never got a chance to get to know each other. They both had careers that were taking off and required their full attention, and Big was unable to resist the temptations of the flesh that were now constantly available to him. Despite the birth of a son, Christopher Jordan, or CJ, the pair separated at the end of 1996, although they remained on good terms and may even have got back together if Big had not died 3 months later. The seeds of the future tragedy were further sown at the Source magazine awards show in 1995. This was the night the East Coast-West Coast feud between Bad Boy Entertainment and Death Row Records stepped up a gear, as representatives of the two labels clashed in the parking lot outside. There was a heated argument, and one of Bad Boy's security men threatened one of Death Row's guards with a gun. There was a brief scuffle, but no shots were fired. A month later, however, at producer Jermaine Dupri's birthday party in Atlanta, Death Row employee Jake Robles was shot dead by a fellow guest. Both Suge Knight and Puffy Combs were present, and Knight publicly blamed Puffy for his friend's murder. The case was never solved, although witnesses claimed that the gunman was a bodyguard of Puffy's. Then, on November the 13th, 1995, Tupac's estranged cousin Randy Stretch Walker was murdered in an unsolved drive-by shooting in Queens, New York. On his release from prison in 1996, Tupac released the single Hit 'Em Up, on which he boasted about having sex with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans. In an interview with the New York Times, he claimed that the shirt he was wearing was a gift from Faith. He was egged on by Suge Knight, who asked Tupac, "How did you thank her?" "I did enough," the rapper smirked back. Faith denied that she had been seeing Tupac, and Biggie shrugged off the whole mess as just point scoring, although he was obviously hurt. His single, Who Shot Ya, appeared to be a mocking retaliation, but Biggie went on record denying that the track was about Tupac. In March 1996, all the principal protagonists on both sides were gathered in LA for the 10th annual Soul Train Awards. After Biggie had performed on stage, Suge and Tupac went up to collect the Best Rap Album award for Me Against the World. If you don't want the owner of your label on your album or in your video or on your tour, come sign with Death Row, Knight told the audience, in an unmistakable reference to Puffy Combs and his habit of hogging the spotlight alongside his Bad Boy Entertainment's artists. Puffy, however, refused to be drawn into the East Coast-West Coast beef, repeatedly denying it even existed and stating that he had no problem with Knight, Death Row or any of their artists. That night he took the higher ground, making a speech about unity when he presented an award to Death Row artist Snoop Doggy Dogg and hugging him at the podium. Then, on September 7th, 1996, Tupac was fatally wounded in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. The rapper was travelling from the Mike Tyson vs Bruce Seldon boxing match to an exclusive after-party where he was due to perform. He was in the passenger seat of a BMW driven by Suge Knight when a Cadillac boxed them in at some traffic lights and a gunman in the back seat opened fire. Tupac died 6 days later, on Friday the 13th. His killer was never found.
I was more shocked than anything, you know what I'm saying? But I wasn't more shocked of him dying. I was more shocked to him. Pac is a strong dude, yo. I know Duke, you know what I'm saying? Right. He real strong. So when they was like, he got shot, I was just more like, again? You know what I'm saying? He always getting shot or shot at. He gonna pull through this one again, make a few records about it, and it's gonna be over, you know what I'm saying? But when he died, I was just like, whoa.
Tupac's killing prompted a 5-day gang war between the Bloods and the Crips in Compton, which left 3 people dead and 10 more seriously wounded. The main police suspect in the Tupac murder investigation was Orlando Anderson, a known Crip who had been beaten up by Tupac and his entourage in Las Vegas just hours before the shooting. This incident would lead to Suge Knight going to jail for a parole violation. But just what Anderson was doing in Vegas, or what he did to deserve the beating, may never be known, as he too was slain in an unrelated gun battle in May 1998. However, the word on the street within hours of Tupac's shooting was that it was a Crips hit, and the Bloods, who considered Death Row and Tupac as one of their own, sought bloody revenge. There were other rumours circulating too, that Suge Knight was the real target of the hit, that Tupac faked his own death, and that Biggie Smalls and Bad Boy Entertainments were somehow involved. Sources claimed that Bad Boy regularly hired Crips gang members as security during their visits to the West Coast, something the record label absolutely denied, claiming it was racist to assume that they had gangland connections just because they were a black-owned company. They hired off-duty police officers, they said, the same as any celebrity such as Madonna or Sharon Stone might do. But the media insisted that there was some connection between the East-West rap feud and Tupac's death, and the police took the issue seriously too. However, no solid leads emerged in any direction. Biggie, as always, had his own problems at the time of Tupac's death. In August 1996, his home was raided by undercover police, who confiscated an infrared rifle, a submachine gun, a variety of other guns and ammunition, and a quantity of marijuana. He was arrested, then released on bail, but in September, 2 days after Tupac died, he was arrested again when officers caught him smoking weed in his car, parked on the street in Brooklyn. He was again released pending trial, but never lived to see the case come to court. Biggie expressed nothing but shock and sadness at Tupac's demise. Nevertheless, he was widely criticised for failing to attend a rap peace summit held in Harlem in the wake of the murder. He claimed that he was too busy working on his second album, as well as recovering from a serious car accident that had left him in a wheelchair with a metal pin holding his shattered leg together. In the 2 months following Tupac's death, Biggie was undergoing extensive therapy to enable him to walk again in the Kessler Institute for Rehabilitation in New Jersey. Perhaps because he was away from the scene for a while, Biggie refused to believe that anybody on the West Coast harboured any bad feelings towards him. Indeed, he and Puffy were seen in public in California much more frequently now that Tupac was dead and Suge Knight was in jail. They seemed almost to be flaunting the ease with which they could come over to the West, and Biggie even talked about buying a house in LA. Many thought that it was time to remind them just whose territory they were on, that Tupac was still remembered, and that Biggie's supposed involvement in his earlier shooting had not been forgotten either. Many were determined that Bad Boy should not be seen to have won the rap war with Death Row and the West Coast. These were the elements that booed and jeered when Biggie appeared at the 1997 Soul Train Awards, and these may have been the elements that delivered flashing death to him before vanishing back into the unforgiving night.
If a nigga gonna get me, a nigga gonna get me. Ain't like I can't be got. It's just gonna be hard as fuck.
Biggie had been in LA, helping to record Puffy's debut solo album No Way Out, as well as to promote his own forthcoming second album, along with its trailer single Hypnotize, when he was gunned down while leaving the Soul Train after party. He was scheduled to leave for London that morning, but his plans had been changed, in part, ironically, because he didn't feel safe in Europe. Biggie was convinced that once his album dropped in 2 weeks' time, he would finally earn the respect and recognition he deserved as one of the true greats of the hip-hop genre. His prediction came true, but what Biggie didn't foresee was that he wouldn't be around to enjoy the acclaim. Immediately after the shooting, the media were on the scene, relaying the breaking news to the world. Fans gathered outside the Cedars Sinai Medical Center where he'd been taken, still hoping that somehow he would pull through. It was left to Damian Butler, Biggie's best friend and road manager, to call Valletta Wallace in New York to tell her of her son's death. She immediately flew to LA to identify his body and to bring him back home to Brooklyn. Biggie's funeral was held 9 days after his shooting on March the 18th, 1997. His body lay in state at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel, where 350 invited guests, including Run DMC, Kool Herc, Dr. Dre, Busta Rhymes, and former New York Mayor David Dinkins paid their last respects. He was laid in a $15,000 extra-large mahogany white velvet-lined coffin, dressed in a cream silk shirt, a double-breasted white suit and matching felt hat. Valletta Wallace read from the scriptures. Faith Evans sang the gospel song Walk With Me, Lord, and Puffy delivered the eulogy, while Lil' Kim and Mary J. Blige sobbed uncontrollably in the aisles. A procession of 20 black limousines then followed 4 flower-bedecked cars, and the hearse carrying Biggie's body back to his old neighbourhood of Clinton Hill, Brooklyn. Thousands of fans, neighbours and onlookers lined the streets every step of the way, and Biggie's old apartment building became a shrine to the fallen rapper. The funeral ended in rioting when heavily armed police clashed with fans and mourners, spraying them with mace and beating them with nightsticks in an attempt to get them to disperse. A week later, Biggie's second album, Life After Death, Till Death Us Do Part, was released on schedule, with the same artwork and promotional ads as originally planned. These featured Biggie standing by his own grave in a gothically depicted cemetery and watched over by his own ghost. while the album cover showed him dressed as an undertaker, leaning against a hearse. The album began with the sound of a heartbeat, then cut to Biggie and Puffy on the phone talking about suicide. Then we seemingly hear Biggie being shot and Puffy at his hospital bedside as he flatlines, saying that this wasn't meant to happen, that they were meant to rule the world. The coincidences were too much to take, and platitudes about life imitating art turned to dust in the mouth. You're nobody till somebody kills you went the album's final track. Biggie was already somebody, but death made him a legend.
Anything we could do to get the crowd crazy, anything we could do, we just do it. If I wasn't such a big nigga, I'd have been jumping in the crowd too. But I ain't really with that extracurricular shit.
One of the most widely held theories about Biggie's murder was that Bad Boy Entertainments owed money to Southside Crip gang members that they had employed as security, then refused to pay. They had replaced the gang members with off-duty police officers when the Crips had upped their fee to an extortionate amount. Biggie was rumoured to have gone down to Compton alone and met up with Crip gang members in a park in an attempt to resolve the issue. His refusal to pay or rehire them led to his shooting. Another theory was that Biggie's killing was a professional contract hit, allegedly ordered by Suge Knight from prison and using an ex-cop called David Mack as a go-between. Mack had attended death row parties with his LAPD partner Kevin Gaines, who lived with Suge's estranged wife, Sharitha Knight, manager of Snoop Doggy Dogg, among others. In November 1997, Mack was sentenced to 14 years for a bank robbery, but eyewitnesses placed him at the scene of Biggie's murder 8 months earlier. Mack had taken days off work around the time of the shooting, and when police searched his apartment, they found what they called a shrine to Tupac Shakur. In this scenario, however, the actual killer was one Amir Muhammad, a college friend of Mack's who he hired on Suge's behalf and who resembled the artist's impression of the suspect, released by police and based on eyewitness testimonies. Muhammad was never located. Damian Butler and Lil Cease saw the killer from the backseat of Biggie's car. He was a smart, short-haired black man in his early 20s, wearing a suit and a bow tie. Butler is also convinced from the look on his face when he was shot that Biggie knew his assassin. Others thought that Puffy, not Biggie, was the intended victim. And what of the off-duty cops hired to provide security? How could they not only fail to prevent the murder, but not even see what happened? Many at Bad Boy also claimed to know for a fact that Biggie and Puffy were under FBI surveillance for 6 months prior to and during the night of the shooting, for reasons unknown. Surely then they must know something. All parties concerned claimed that someone was covering something up. The only question was who and what.
I gotta stay on the positive vibe. All my people's gotta stay on the positive vibe, you know. The negativity just brings failure, you know. And we ain't trying to fail in this game, we're trying to succeed.
More than 5 years after his death, the mystery of who killed Biggie Smalls has not been solved. Neither has the murder of Tupac Shakur, although new rumours continue to surface linking the one to the other. Critics have argued that the police are simply not trying hard enough, that if the victims had been white men of similar status, their killers would be in jail by now. Others blame both Suge Knight and Puffy Combs for not telling all they know, and the code of silence that prevents anyone on the streets who might know who did it from coming forward. Puffy has hardly let Biggie be forgotten, however. As Puff Daddy, he released one of the biggest selling singles of all time, Missing You. Dedicated to his late friend and credited to Puff Daddy, Faith Evans and the Bad Boy family, This worldwide hit single also featured Biggie's wife singing atop the sampled chorus from the old Police song Every Breath You Take. Biggie's Life After Death LP went straight to number 1 in its first week of release, and in January 2000 was recognised as having notched up 10 million album sales. The 1998 compilation of outtakes, demos and remixes was another huge seller. Puffy has continued to accept posthumous awards on Big's behalf, and to dedicate his every move to his memory. Lil' Kim too has paid repeated tributes to her former mentor, and some claim lover, on numerous tracks. And millions of dollars continue to be generated for Biggie's estate, for Puff, Faith, and for Valletta Wallace and Big's 2 children. Though his killer may never be found, the Notorious B.I.G. will never be forgotten. Wherever there's a beat and a rhyme and someone telling it like it is, from the street and from the heart, his memory will remain. He walked tall and cast a large shadow. We love you, Big Poppa.
Thanks for buying Maximum B.I.G. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.